Okay, now it's time to switch gears a bit. Up to now, you've learned about a lot of practices that can keep food safe as it flows through your operation. But to be really effective, you have to find a way to tie all those practices together into a system that you can manage and monitor. Fortunately, there's a way to do that. It's called a food safety management system. So, we're going to start by exploring what a food safety management system is. And that leads into two important concepts that you'll be hearing about shortly: active managerial control and hazard analysis critical control point, HACCP for short. Let's start at the top. Any idea what a food safety management system is? That's right. A food safety management system includes practices and procedures intended to prevent foodborne illness. But the purpose of those practices and procedures is to actively control risks and hazards throughout the flow of food. To make all of this work, you have to have certain food safety programs in place. They'll serve as the foundation upon which to build the system. The good news is that the principles you're learning in this course are the basis of these programs.
What kind of food safety programs are we talking about? Let's see if you can figure it out. Take a look at this list and select any program that should be in place in order for a food safety management system to be effective. Just so you know, there's more than one answer. When you're done, select the Am I Right button. It's all of them. You should have programs in place for personal hygiene, supplier selection and specifications, cleaning and sanitation, facility design and equipment maintenance, pest control, quality control and assurance, food safety training, and finally, standard operating procedures.
Now that you know what a food safety management system is and the programs you need to have in place before you develop one, it's time to talk about active managerial control. Before we do that, it's important to see what you remember about the common risk factors for foodborne illness. Earlier, you learned that there are 5 common risk factors for foodborne illness: purchasing food from unsafe sources, failing to cook food correctly, holding food at incorrect temperatures, using contaminated equipment, and practicing poor personal hygiene. Because these risk factors are so important to the rest of the conversation, let's see what you remember about them. You're going to hear from several people who each acted in a way that might be a risk for foodborne illness. Listen to each person and then decide which of the 5 common risk factors for foodborne illness applies. Are you ready?
Here's the first one. Which risk factor applies?
I brought my uniform home, but I forgot to wash it before starting my shift. It wasn't bad, so I wore it to work anyway.
You got it. Wearing a dirty uniform to work is poor personal hygiene, and that can cause a foodborne illness. Here's another. Which risk factor applies?
I plated a chicken breast after making sure it was cooked to 155 degrees Fahrenheit, 68 degrees Celsius.
That's right. The cook failed to cook the chicken correctly because it should have been cooked to 165 degrees Fahrenheit, 74 degrees Celsius, before serving it. That can cause a foodborne illness. Try this one. Which risk factor applies?
My friend raises beef and sells fresh steaks on the side from her home, so I bought a few cases and put them on the menu to try them out.
That's right. It's especially true if this source is not inspected or does not meet all applicable local, state, and federal laws. Listen to this one. Which risk factor applies?
I checked the steamed rice in the hot holding unit and it was at 120 degrees Fahrenheit, 49 degrees Celsius, so I went ahead and served it.
Yep. This has to do with holding food at the correct temperature. The rice should be held at 135 degrees Fahrenheit, 57 degrees Celsius, or higher. Last one. Which risk factor applies?
After I finished prepping fish, I immediately used the same knife and cutting board to prep produce.
That's right. Using equipment to prep produce after prepping fish could cause a foodborne illness. So, contaminated equipment is the issue here.
It's your job to actively control the 5 risk factors for foodborne illness and any others. This is called active managerial control. Because it's something that may be new to you and because it can be complicated, I'm going to have an expert explain it to you. She's a health inspector who's got a lot of experience with active managerial control, and she's waiting patiently for your questions. She'll have some for you too, so be ready.
Great question. Active managerial control is what a manager does to control the risk factors for foodborne illness. The word does is key here. Managers have to look for ways to actively control risk factors. That's the active part in active managerial control, and it's a proactive rather than a reactive program. That's because you have to anticipate food safety risks and plan ahead for them. Thought you might ask that. Actually, according to the FDA, there are many ways to achieve active managerial control in the operation. Before I tell you what they are, why don't you take a stab at it? You're right, but that's not the only way. According to the FDA, active managerial control can be achieved by using simple tools such as training programs, manager supervision, and the incorporation of SOPs. It can also be achieved through more complex solutions, such as a hazard analysis critical control point or HACCP program. More about that later. That's the million-dollar question. Well, as a manager, you have to practice active managerial control throughout the flow of food, which will help you keep your operation free from risk. That includes anticipating potential foodborne illness risk factors and then controlling or eliminating them. You might already be doing some of these things, such as purchasing food from approved suppliers, but it also includes many of the things you've learned, like making sure food is held at the proper temperature or cooking food to its required minimum internal cooking temperature. Of course, to do these things, you have to make sure your staff has the proper tools, such as procedures and training to make sure food is safe. There are some important steps to take when implementing active managerial control in your operation. Let's take a look at them. First, you'll want to find and document any potential foodborne illness risks in your operation, and then identify those hazards that can be controlled or eliminated. Next comes monitoring. You see, food will be safe if managers monitor critical activities in the operation. So you need to note where employees must monitor food safety requirements. This might include identifying when temperature should be taken, or how often sanitizer concentration should be tested in a 3-compartment sink. Then there's corrective action. Here you'll need to take the appropriate steps to correct improper procedures or behaviors, like when it's necessary to increase the concentration of a sanitizer after finding out it was too low when tested. Management oversight is critical to implementing active managerial control. That means verifying that your staff is following all policies, procedures, and corrective actions. As I mentioned earlier, training is important to active managerial control. So ensure that your employees are trained to follow all food safety procedures. And if you need to, train them again. Finally, you need to reevaluate your active managerial control program. That includes periodically reassessing the system to make sure it's working correctly and effectively.
Whew, that was a lot, I know. But talking about how to control the risks that cause foodborne illness is so important. Fortunately, the FDA also has some recommendations for how to control them. They call them public health interventions, and as the name implies, they're designed to protect public health.
Knowing how to keep food safe and being able to show it can help prevent foodborne illness. It's what the FDA calls the demonstration of knowledge. As a manager, you have to be able to show that you know what to do to keep food safe. Becoming certified in food safety is one way to show this. You're on your way towards that by taking this course. Because poor personal hygiene leads to foodborne illness, the FDA has identified staff health controls that should be put in place to ensure they're practicing good personal hygiene. This includes things like reporting illnesses and illness symptoms to management. And while we're on the subject of hygiene, it's important to discuss the FDA's recommendation for controlling hands as a vehicle of contamination, and its aim at controlling bare hand contact with ready-to-eat food. This might include requiring the use of tongs to handle this food. We now know that failing to cook or hold food at the right temperature can lead to foodborne illness. To address this, the FDA recommends incorporating time and temperature parameters into food safety procedures for controlling pathogens. Those procedures should limit the time food spends in the temperature danger zone. Requiring food handlers to check the temperature of food being hot held every 2 hours is an example. Finally, if food will be served raw or undercooked in your operation, the FDA recommends the inclusion of consumer advisories. Remember, consumer advisories let customers know which items on your menu are served raw or undercooked, and include a statement about the risk of eating these foods. That about does it for the FDA's public health interventions.
There are many systems you can implement to achieve active managerial control of foodborne illness risk factors. Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point is one such system. It's pronounced HACCP, by the way. HACCP is based on identifying significant biological, chemical, or physical hazards at specific points within a product's flow through the operation. Once identified, the hazards can be prevented, eliminated, or reduced to safe levels. An effective HACCP system must be based on a written plan. This plan must be specific to each facility's menu, customers, equipment, processes, and operations. Since each HACCP plan is unique, a plan that works for one operation may not work for another. Okay, that about covers food safety management systems. Short module, but big important content, right? All that's left are a couple of multiple choice questions, and you're done.
What system is specifically focused on controlling the 5 common risk factors for foodborne illness? Nope. Not all food safety management systems are specifically focused on controlling the 5 common risk factors for foodborne illness. Try again. Yes, active managerial control is specifically focused on controlling the 5 common risk factors for foodborne illness. A pest management program is an example of what type of program? Yes, a pest management program is a food safety program upon which you can build a food safety management system, like HACCP. Nicely done. What is the risk factor for foodborne illness for a pie prepped on the same cutting board as raw meat? Yes, the cutting board may be contaminated and could cause a foodborne illness. What is the purpose of a food safety management system? You got it. A food safety management system will prevent foodborne illness by controlling risk and hazards throughout the flow of food. What are 3 steps that must be taken when implementing active managerial control? Yes, identifying risk, taking corrective action, and training are all part of implementing active managerial control in your operation. Just keep in mind that there are other steps you have to follow as well. A supervisor who walks around the operation to see if staff is following food safety procedures is demonstrating which step in active managerial control. Yep. Management oversight means verifying that your staff is following all policies, procedures, and corrective actions. Nice job! How can managers show that they know how to keep food safe? Absolutely right. As a manager, you have to be able to show that you know what to do to keep food safe. Becoming certified in food safety is one way to show this.